Welcome to Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, the podcast where music inspires action for social and climate justice.
Hi, and welcome to Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, Episode 38, Season 2. I'm your host, Warren Senders. Please remember to hit like and subscribe so we can keep bringing you inspiring music and activism all year round. Conventional wisdom has the environmental movement beginning in the 1960s with Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book, Silent Spring. But our guest tells a story that goes back centuries. Before we share music and conversation with Dr. Chad Montrie, here's Daniel P. Smith Jr. and perhaps the earliest American environmental song dating all the way back to 1837, Woodman, Spare That Tree.
Woodman, spare that tree, touch not a single bough. In youth it sheltered me, and I'll protect it now. 'Twas my forefather's hand that placed it near his cot. There Woodman let it stand, thy axe shall harm it not.
Hi, and welcome to Cool Tunes for Hot Planet. I'm your host, Warren Senders, and joining me today is Dr. Chad Montrie. Dr. Montrie is a professor of history at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. He's a historian of the environmental movement and the labor movement, and among his books are Myth of Silent Spring, Rethinking the Origins of American Environmentalism, A People's History of Environmentalism in the United States, and Making a Living. And he's come in here to talk with us today about the headwaters of environmentalism in the United States. Chad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation to be here.
That old familiar tree, its glory and renown are spread o'er land and sea, and wouldst thou hew it down, Woodman, forbear thy stroke, cut not its earth-bound ties. Oh, spare that aged oak, now towering to the skies.
There's a misleading notion that's promulgated in our media and in our civic discourse that the interests of environmentalism and the interests of labor are necessarily at odds with one another.
It comes from the constant reference to jobs being opposed to the environment, that you'd had to choose one or the other. You're either a worker or you're an environmentalist, and you couldn't be both. And it occurred to me that there was an unacknowledged history of workers themselves being aware of environmental problems and responding to those in different ways with different methods, different strategies. People would often say the environmental movement started in the 1960s, and that happened as a result of Rachel Carson publishing her book Silent Spring in 1962. And what most makes sense, in fact, is to tie the rise of environmental consciousness and protest to the industrialization and urbanization that are happening in the early 19th century and to proceed from that point on. So going back a whole, at least century and a half, if not 2 centuries earlier, by putting workers into the story, if you do history from the bottom up and to not just concentrate on individuals being the ones who are responsible for historical change, but that there's a whole mass of people oftentimes behind significant transformation. You have to pay attention beyond just the great man or a great woman, great leaders,
or great book for that matter.
or a great book for that matter, that sort of supposedly orchestrated a change over time. She herself would have said that she was a part of a larger movement already. And in fact, when she decided to write Silent Spring, or what became Silent Spring, that was in reaction to letters that she was receiving from people that were organizing against the use of DDT in suburbs and elsewhere, by the Fish and Wildlife Service and other government agencies, to control for malaria.
Mama, 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 where did you hide my D.D.T?
Jazz trombone master George Brunis and his D.D.T blues.
I said, mama, 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 where did you hide my D.D.T? I know if you find it, you'll surely spread all over me.
That alone tells you that people are already doing something about environmental problems even before her book was published. The topic that I started with, the opposition to surface coal mining, which is a type of mining that is much more environmentally destructive than deep mining. There were people already doing things around the strip mining that's going on in southern Appalachia in the 1930s and 1940s, right? So we're talking about 20 years before Carson. And so the book itself isn't an influence on them. Some of them are mine workers themselves.
Payday, payday, oh payday, payday, don't come at Cold Creek no more, payday, don't come no more.
That was Pete Steele in 1938 singing Payday at Coal Creek. Part 1. The Lowell Mill Women.
Come all ye Lewiston factory girls, I want you to understand. I'm gonna leave this factory and return to my native land. Sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum-dee away, sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum-dee.
This segment features the Factory Girls Come All Ye, sung by a Massachusetts musician, Diane Taraz, and Sharada Sundaram Senders reading an excerpt from the Lowell newspaper, which provided a forum for the workers.
No more will I take my shaker and shawl and hurry to the mill. No more I'll work so pesky hard to earn a dollar bill. Sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum.
The 17th, 18th century was really a time in New England where the farm itself was an extended family using nature for their own needs. There was maybe some cash exchange, but mostly it's things like helping somebody mend a fence, and in exchange for that, they get some eggs, or somebody goes fishing and brings back a fish or takes down a deer, and then they exchange something. In order to survive, they had to know something about nature. And what's going on in the early 19th century is that they're just having so many kids, and they're dividing up the land into such smaller parts that some people have to go into a factory to settle a debt in the family, or for the family to buy more land, or to send a son to college. And then they would leave. They would get married, and oftentimes by their early 20s, they were gone. In the meantime, though, they had a real experience with industrial wage labor and separation from nature, and a lot of them are literate, and so they were reading and writing, and they're producing their own romantic poetry, their own romantic stories. Meanwhile, the transcendentalists in Concord were sort of thinking they're inventing this, right, this opposition to industrialization, but the mill women themselves had their own working class environmental consciousness, and that manifested in many ways, including with the romantic writing that they were doing.
Friends, think not, while surrounded by the green fields, feasting my mind with their beauties, that I do not cast a sympathizing thought to the many shut up in the mills, constantly toiling, without time to look around upon the face of nature. Often I wander to the banks of our river and watch its course as it wends its way to meet the beautiful Merrimack, listening to merry songs of birds sending forth their joyful notes. Too soon I am awakened from this pleasing reverie and led to think of the evils growing up in the present state of society.
They'll leave temporarily, like go out back home to just visit their family, and then they'll write letters back to their peers in the factory saying, it's so much better here, we've forgotten, so glad to be away from the factory.
No more will I take the towel and soap and go to the sink to wash. No more the overseer'll say, you're making a terrible splosh. Sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum-dee-way, sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum-dee-way.
There are various ways that mill women protested their conditions, including walkouts, what we would call strikes, and they often sort of channeled that through their inheritance of a American revolutionary consciousness, this idea that their fathers and mothers had made a revolution to end the tyranny of Britain, right? And that had introduced this idea of natural rights, that they shouldn't be subjected to tyranny in any way, and that they should have freedom. And so that becomes the basis for women as well as men throughout American history from that point on to expand what rights they might have. And when they get to the factories, they see their rights are getting circumscribed, and so they protest.
I'm going back to Boston town. I'll live on Tremont Street, and I want all you factory girls to come to my house and eat. Sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum-dee-way, sing dum-dee-wickerty-dum-dee-way.
Part 2. Sharecropping. We'll hear excerpts from Tim Moore's Farm by Leighton Hopkins and William Harris's Bullfrog Blues, starting with Po Black Sheep by Nathan Frazier and Frank Patterson, veteran Tennessee performers who played dances and parties in their sharecropping communities in the 1920s and 30s.
For people of African ancestry, millions of them, of course, having the opportunity to operate or to make a living in a capitalist context could be liberating or somewhat liberating, right? Had the radical Republicans been successful and we had rebuilt America along lines of democracy, they could have had a much better life than they were living in, say, the 1840s, 1850s. What replaced racial slavery instead, however, was sharecropping, which involved people oftentimes working on the very same plantation that they had been working on before when they were enslaved, and sort of then being employed by the same person who had been their enslaver.
You know, Mr. Tim, old man, he don't never stand and grin. He just said, keep out of graveyard, I'll save you from the pen. You know, soon in the morning, he'll give you scrambled eggs. Yes, but his Lord will call you so soon, you'll catch a mule by his hind leg.
But what happens to many of these people who are on the plantation and working as sharecroppers, they get very quickly into a cycle of debt because the sharecropper might have borrowed at the beginning of a growing season to buy seed or to buy a draft animal. And meanwhile, they're also finding that when they sign a contract, that those contracts can limit what else they could do with their time. So where before they might have supplemented their living by hunting, fishing, gathering, gardening, the landowner can make claims that they shouldn't be out, fishing, they shouldn't be out hunting, they shouldn't be working in their own gardens because they need to be working on the cotton crop or some other staple crop that would produce money, right, would produce a profit.
Have you ever woke up with them good drops on you? Good drops on you? I mean, mine, have you ever woke up, mama? Good drops on your mind. Have you ever woke up with them good drops on your mind?
And they thought of nature differently as a result. The act of freely hunting, fishing, gardening, they would work with nature toward an end of feeding their families, feeding themselves and their families, or doing something to improve their housing, or producing the clothing that they needed. Whereas if they're working in many acres of cotton, and that cotton doesn't even belong to them, but it's going to go right to the landowner, so they're just exploited. Then their attitudes about that land are also different than the forests or the fields or the streams.
Let it rain, yeah, mama, sun shining in your, sun shining in your. I mean, though it's gonna rain today, mama, sun shining in your door.
Part 3, Hull House. Lots of 78s were recorded in Chicago back in the day. We'll hear the Joliet Girls Polka by the Peruche Dance Orchestra, Chicago Buzz by Junie Cobb and Johnny Dodds, Schlevnamon and the Dublin Hornpipe by Johnny McGreevy, and Swedish singer Henry Korsell's rendition of Barndom's Hemmet, or My Childhood Home.
När som sädesfälten böja sig för vinden och där mörkgrön granskog susar bakom dem står den röda lilla stugan bort vid grinden som i forna dagar var mitt barndomshem. Det var sol och sommar över gröna hagar när som 18-åring jag där hemma var. Och de minnen som står kvar från dessa dagar är det bästa och det vackraste jag har.
Chicago is a great example of late 19th, early 20th century environmental problems that are a result of industrialization and urbanization. From 1870 to 1920, we have 26 million people come to the country as immigrants, mostly of Europe, but also Mexico and China, Japan, other parts of East Asia. Most of them, though, from Europe, and not all of those people are going to fit into the American culture, American economy. They're actually going to struggle quite a bit. Many immigrants had to sort of fight their way into even having the privileges of whiteness. And then there's African Americans who are migrating from the deep south to the urban north, including to places like Chicago. And what they find is a lot of problems, and they deal with them not only in the workplace because of how capitalist wage labor sort of exploits them, but also in their neighborhoods where they live, in their communities, because of the way that industrial capitalism has an impact on that urban landscape. Hull House was established, like many other settlement houses, in the middle of an immigrant ward, not just one immigrant group. The immigrants that Hull House dealt with were a whole range, just as your music, I think, sort of sampled that. They then start to work together to address things like bad sewage, garbage being disposed of behind their tenements, and then, of course, there were disease epidemics. But the thing that they're doing in the first couple decades of the 20th century is to think of, well, what kind of sanitation that could they practice? But how they get that is they have to demand that of city governments.
Hull House was a focal point for performing arts. Viola Spolin, the daughter of immigrants, started theater classes that laid the foundation for groundbreaking improvisation groups like Second City. Eleanor Smith directed the music programs, teaching classes for neighborhood kids, including a youngster named Benny Goodman. Her Hull House songbook held 6 songs on social and environmental themes, and we'll hear an excerpt from The Land of the Noonday Night, sung by Jocelyn Zelasco, with piano accompaniment from Amanda Sablehouse.
We have eyes to see like
There is coal mining in Illinois, in southern Illinois. It's possible that she was hearing about what was going on in southern Appalachia at the time, too. There were settlement houses. There's actually, in fact, a very important settlement house movement in eastern Kentucky, and they too got involved in dealing with the problems that coal mining families faced at the time.
You've used the phrase settlement house. I only have a vague idea of what that actually means. What's a settlement house?
It's a movement that starts around the 1870s, 1880s, modeled on what's going on in a part of Britain, where highly educated people decided, as a result of what they call the social gospel, like being moved by their interpretation of Christianity, to go and administer to the needs of the poor in cities. And to do that, they would buy or rent, I suppose, a house that would allow them to live in the middle of the populations. So when they do that in the United States, part of what is driving the settlement house movement is young women are being allowed to go to college by the 1850s, 60s. There are not a lot of other career options open to them, so they invent social work. I mean, that's basically what they do. It's not called that at the time, and they go set up these settlement houses and start doing the kinds of things that today we would associate with social work.
And this is community organizing.
Yeah, basically. And,
Right.
and I think of it as environmentalism. And that's another thing that I had to do in order to reinterpret the story of the emergence of an environmental movement, was to think about things that people had said were something else as also environmentalism.
But our home is not like yours. 'Tis a bare, unpainted shack where the raindrops pour on the shaky floor and the coal dust stains it black. Not a flower or blade of grass can escape the grimy blight, for the face of our yard is seared and scarred in the land of the noonday night.
Part 4, the CCC. This segment introduces Bill Jamerson, a musician and historian from Michigan. His program, Dollar a Day Boys, introduces audiences to the Civilian Conservation Corps, perhaps the single most popular program in FDR's New Deal. He allowed us to include his song Wood Tick in this episode. But first, here's the All-Star Troubadours version of Happy Days Are Here Again.
Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again. All together.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and of vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory. And I am convinced that you will again give that support to leadership in these critical days.
Tell me a little bit about the CCC.
Well, it's the first program really that Franklin Delano Roosevelt established by way of having also control of the Democrats, having control over Congress when he took office in the spring of 1933. Back then, we inaugurated the president in March, and it is hugely popular. By taking young men between the ages of 18 and 22, I think, or 24, and put them to work doing repair in forests, doing soil conservation work in fields, also doing some dune restoration along some shorelines. And there is eventually Eleanor Roosevelt, lobbied, and there was some room made for women, although there's only 6,400 women who participate.
I was up in Hayward, Wisconsin last summer and at the Lumberjack Museum, and on the wall was a poem. And the name of the poem was Wood Ticks. And that was one of the bad nicknames they gave the CCs. So I took that poem and I turned it into a song. Because it shows what it was like from the point of view of a CCC boy. They call us lousy wood ticks who love to drink and fight, but it's where the CCs are when fires break out at night. We are the most unruly crowd the Lord has ever made, but when the flood breaks o'er the dam, it's CC, grab your spade. They say we drive our trucks too fast and make a lot of noise, but when some mishap comes their way, it's called the CC boys. They say we're non-supporting and on the relief rolls, but it's hello, Mr. CC man, when we vote at the polls. Oh, call me Cedar Savage, I don't pay it no mind. Call me a brush monkey, you'll never hear me whine. Call me a stump jumper, it won't bother me a bit. But when you call me wood tick, it puts me in a fit.
By working with nature, they gain a knowledge of nature, they gain an appreciation of nature. And when they are successful, as this song is pointing out, the communities where they're working also see that there is a need for and a place for conservation work to go along with the capitalist economy that they're living in. And one of the examples that I've worked on is the Harold Parker State Forest, which had two CCC camps there, one established in 1933, another in 1934. And before the CCC is established, there are a lot of worries that are similar to what is expressed in the song, that these young men are going to come into town and just wreak havoc and cause trouble, and that just doesn't happen. And people really do appreciate what work that they're doing. And there's a flood on the Shawsheen River that's very similar to the song's story, and the young men who help people in desperate need at the time are celebrated almost as heroes.
Mm-hmm. And of course, once they left the CCC, the awarenesses that they've acquired and developed didn't stop.
Exactly. And these are working class or had been working class environmentalists, and probably were advocates. And then the people in the communities, like especially the farmers out in the Midwest who are seeing soil conservation projects work, they're going to be supportive of conservation work. And not a small thing, a lot of people see the government as a very important part of that. This is a shift that's going on through the 20th century, this idea that the government should have responsibility to take care of the citizens, and part of that means, dealing with environmental problems that might be affecting them, whether they live in a city or a rural place.
Almost, but not quite, according human rights to the environment.
Yes, right. Going back to what I was saying about the mill women too, that they see this as an expansion of what they already know, which is that for people who are Americans, they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and tyranny that interferes with that shouldn't stand. That the government has that they make has a duty to protect those rights, and those rights are sort of more narrowly defined in the 1780s and 1790s, and they become bigger over time, including eventually encompassing the environment.
Part 5, the UAW. We'll start off with a quick chorus of Cadillac Assembly Line by bluesmaster Lurie Bell.
Born to Detroit, Michigan. Girl, I can't take you. Well, I'm born in Detroit, Michigan. You got to stay here behind. Yeah.
Joe Lisi worked at the Mack Truck Factory in New Jersey in 1951 when he was elected to UAW Local 824. As he rose in the union, he continued to focus on music and recreation, eventually campaigning for JFK, who invited him to the inauguration. Lisi's album of union songs came out in 1965 and included what is almost certainly the first song to use the word pollution.
We've gotta fight pollution now, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. We've gotta fight pollution now, down by the riverside, to keep our waters clean. We've gotta fight pollution now, we've gotta fight pollution now, we've gotta fight pollution now. We've gotta fight pollution now, we've gotta fight pollution now, to curb pollution now. The UAW is looking hard, down by the riverside.
In your books, you talk about the role of Walter Reuther and the UAW as being something really integral to the development of environmental understanding in the U.S. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, like the song, that's probably counterintuitive, right? A lot of people would just not believe it. that one of the leading voices for dealing with both air and water pollution would be the United Auto Workers representing people making cars. But there are key leaders, and Walter Reuther is a visionary, and probably UAW wouldn't have been such an important environmental advocate had it not been for him. And when Rachel Carson was sick and couldn't travel, she had been invited to give a keynote speech at the National Wildlife Federation conference in Detroit, and she couldn't make it. So then they said, well, who else could we pick? And he came, and when he did his speech, he not only talked about pollution, environmental problems, but how they're connected to economic, changes taking place in the country. When they had what they called the Clean Water Conference in 1964, they managed to bring 1,000 people together, some from across the border in Canada, union leaders, union members, conservationists, public health advocates, religious leaders. At the time, no one else had brought together so many people for dealing with water or air pollution before 1964, and the UAW orchestrating the whole thing.
The UAW is looking hard, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside.
And the UAW, again, is sort of at the center of the environmental justice movement to link economic as well as economic exploitation, racial discrimination, and environmental problems.
Down by the riverside, down by the riverside.
Walter Reuther died in a plane crash soon after, just weeks after he had addressed crowds during the first Earth Day.
Part 6, the UFW. This segment includes El Picket Sign by El Teatro Campesino.
Desde Texas a California, campesinos están luchando. Desde Texas a California, campesinos están luchando. Los rancheros a llore y llore, de huelga ya están bien pandos. El picket sign, lo llevo por todo el día. El picket sign.
United Farm Workers in Southern California in 1962, dealing with wages, dealing with hours, dealing with poor housing, sanitation, but also exposure to synthetic pesticides. And they made all of those things part of the struggle. And in fact, by the time they signed their first contracts in the end of the 1960s with growers, they have more protection in their contracts from pesticide exposure than exists in any state or federal law.
You point out that this is an area where Rachel Carson did not address the issue completely.
When she wrote her book, Silent Spring, which is essentially an expose of pesticides, she didn't think of the problem in terms of class and race, like why pesticides are being used, who was using them, how they were being used. And she didn't think of the solutions in terms of class and race, which is like why people are limited in terms of their ability to protect themselves. Which is ironic, of course, because probably the people that were exposed most often and most severely would be working class people like the farm workers in Southern California. When I was doing book talks for the Myth of Silent Spring, sometimes people who hadn't read the book would say, "Why do I hate Rachel Carson so much?" And I'd have to start there, and it really isn't my intention.
Part 7, Silent Spring. It's a great book title and clearly a great song title, too. We'll hear jazz diva Carmen McRae in an uncharacteristic gospel funk setting, and Carla Bley's instrumental performed by Gary Burton and his ensemble. But first, here's Lena Horne singing the song by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg.
Not a leaf is heard to murmur, not a bird is heard to sing, and bewildered eyes scan the fearful skies, asking why this strange and silent spring.
The science of Silent Spring is pretty solid, and you can still read it today as the expose of pesticides that it was meant to be. What is lacking is the social awareness that she didn't have as a white woman who's fairly middle class. She just didn't see the world that way.
Greenness turn to brownness, turn to blackness, turn to ash. Would you sell your children's future if they offered you the cash? But the season they're creating, you accept without a fight. Plastic birds and concrete flowers. That's in an everlasting night. The silent spring, the deadly spring.
Part 8, The Tenants' Rights Movement. Here's folk singer Jimmy Collier with Rent Strike Blues.
I got the rent strike. The rent strike blues.
So we'll go back in time a little bit to a great example would be East St. Louis.
I got the rent strike.
Where there's a very militant civil rights, black civil rights movement happening. And one of the things that they are dealing with in terms of their housing is lead. Lead paint was actually being used increasingly after the 1920s, but then as a result of neglect, that paint is starting to chip and turn into dust, and young kids who are showing signs of that. And they start trying to get the city government involved, and they do get some legislation passed in the early 1970s that starts what today we would think of as lead abatement. And again, is this a black civil rights campaign or is it an environmental campaign, right? It's really both. It actually starts as a tenants' rights campaign and evolves into something more, especially after Earth Day, the first Earth Day.
Ecology man, he'll go anywhere. Now he's a peace-loving man. because he really cares about the air and food that should keep us strong. But the way it is, you know we can't live long. The man he knows.
Part 9, California. That was Danny Boyd and the Sounds of Young Los Angeles doing Ecology Man. California was all over the news for the oil spills on its beaches and LA's legendary air pollution. Here's Alan Sherman singing a parody of Jerome Kern's song titled Smog Gets in Your Eyes.
They asked me through the years why I shed these tears. I, of course, replied, when you live in Van Nuys, smog gets in your eyes. I thought I'd play it wise, so I closed my eyes. But what do you suppose? When both my eyes I close, smog gets in my nose.
Chad Montrie, is there anything that you really want people to know?
I would say that the thing that people need to carry away from this is to resist the urge to separate the problems that they see happening in the world into categories that have hard borders, and to see how things are entangled, and that the solutions themselves also have to be multifaceted and complicated, to use the word that we were using earlier.
Nicely framed. And is there anything that people know for sure that just ain't so, as Will Rogers said about Herbert Hoover?
It's the myth of Silent Spring, that the book itself isn't a myth. It's the idea that the book itself, the book published in 1962, started the environmental movement, and that's when we have a movement happening is not until the 1960s. And I want to thank you for having me on the podcast. It's really been great to hear all this music and to get a chance to talk to you.
Chad Montrie, I've learned an enormous amount from our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And that's it for this episode. My complete conversation with Chad Montrie is available on the Cool Tunes YouTube channel. I'd like to thank Daniel Smith, Diane Taraz, Sharada Sundaram Senders, and William Jamerson. I'd also like to thank Graham Casano, Rima Lunin-Schultz, and Jessica Payette of hullhousesongs.org. More information about all our contributors is available at the Cool Tunes website. For the credits, we'll hear Memphis Slim and the House Rockers with their 1951 single, Mother Earth. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep bringing you inspiring activism and music all year round. You can scan this QR code to learn more about Third Act and find opportunities for activism in your area. I'm Warren Senders, and this has been episode 38 of Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet. Thank you for listening.
You may have had me all the time. You may never go my way. Mother Earth is laying for you, 'cause there's a debt you got to pay. Don't care how great you are. Don't care what you were worth. When it all is
Tunes for a Hot Planet is produced by Jack Cochran, Pam Falkenberg, Pearlie Ray Gates, Seth Handelman, James Kahn, Harriet Jerusha Coram, Mark Lagerway, Warren Senders. Janelle Chang is our intern. Cool tunes for a hot planet. Watch it. Cool tunes for a hot planet. Watch it.